Hello everyone, this is Terry Crow, President of Starfish Performance Consultants and creator of Progress to Success Management. Welcome to video 2 of our series as we are focusing on the domain of manage conversation. Welcome back. Are you ready to keep digging further into this exciting domain? Oh, I'm sure you are. So let's get right to it. You may have recalled from the previous video that I said when we returned we were going to be talking about something that's very important to us all, and that has to do with our brains and how interactions are very much integral and impacted and influenced by what goes on in our brains. So, this little thing here, this is your brain, my brain, your brain. And this little thing here plays a huge part in terms of interactions and what happens and what goes on in the brain during those interactions. So I'd like to get this started by talking about and sharing with you that, neuroscience has just been remarkable in the advancements that have been realized in the past 3 years. And in fact, we've learned more about our brains in the past 3 years than we have learned in the past 300 years. We have technology that is now allows us to be able to take pictures of what's going on in our brain when different things are happening, and it shows us what impact our interactions have and what goes on under the hood, so to speak, in our brains that is of great interest to our discussion about managed conversation. What I'd like to do is to begin with something here that you'll want to make sure you write down and commit to memory. When we talk about interactions in the brain, what is essential to remember is that the way our brain is organized is based on a fundamental principle. And the principle is this: that our brain is designed to avoid threat and to capitalize on opportunities. So everything that happens in our brain revolves around this concept of threat, opportunity, threat, opportunity. How do I reduce threat? How do I eliminate threats? How do I capitalize on and increase opportunities? When we look at what goes on in our brains when we feel threatened, we had the fight or flight or freeze scenario that I know you're familiar with. But our brain sends our bodies signals, and it has a great impact in terms of what happens when we feel threatened. In the same vein, our brain wants to move toward opportunity. So when certain things happen that are pleasurable to us, we get a pat on the back, or we get some recognition, we get included in a group that was very important to us. Certain areas within our brains light up. Certain reward areas in our brains light up. We like it. It feels good. We want to move toward opportunities, and we want to move away from things that are threatening to us. It's how we are designed. Now, I'm sure you can easily imagine that how that translates into interactions is that the brain is just going, is greatly at work whenever we are engaged in interactions. Interactions can often trigger our threat response. We don't know what's going on. We don't know what's going to happen. We're not sure how to go about engaging with someone in conversation. And it lights our brains up, and we can feel a threat response. That's one of the reasons why so many people, I myself have certainly been included in this many times before, where we just don't have the interactions at all. Rather than risk the threat of what might happen, we avoid having interactions. Sometimes we avoid having interactions that really were important for us to be able to make some progress on something, or to help someone along the way, or to counsel and coach and help someone improve their performance. Whatever. They can be very threatening to us and to others who are engaged in the conversation as well. So remember, this is about dialogue, so interactions trigger the threat response in others frequently. I remember one point in time I was coaching a leader of an organization, and I was waiting for him in his office, and he came into the office. We were getting ready to talk about an upcoming discussion that he was going to have with someone on his staff, another manager, and it was going to be a difficult conversation, and one where we were going to have to be making some tough decisions along the way about their performance. So this particular leader came in, sat down, and I said, "How are you doing? What's going on?" And he said, "Well, I was so nervous that I just threw up, but now I feel better and I'm ready to talk." And that sounds terrible, but unfortunately sometimes interactions can trigger responses that are that severe in people. It causes us to be anxious. They cause us to be anxious, which is one of the reasons why, as we get better at this, as we start learning ways to practice and build our confidence and our competence, they might not light up our reward centers in our brain, but they won't trigger the threat response as much. And as we're able to be better at these interactions with others, we can help them to be able to have their brains operate in areas that are not in such a threat mode. This is important because when our brain is in this threatening sort of mode, we're not able to have our full cognitive resources available. So it means we're limited in terms of problem solving and being creative and generating insights, making important decisions. It limits us because our brain is not open to those important areas. It matters because whenever we are in more of a toward state in our interactions, we're able to work with people. We're able to have insights and be creative, to come up with ideas and work on projects that are complex, to help us make important decisions. All of these are available to us in greater amounts as our brains are operating in more of this opportunity mode. So keep in mind that this is what's happening in our brains as we are interacting. Your brain on interactions. Okay, some other concepts that go along with this are that when we're talking about interactions, what we're talking about is that our brain is organized to maximize our own self-interests. That's as plainly as I can put it. We have survived as a species because we are we're designed, we're created to maximize our self-interests. So our brain is on the lookout and always being aware of what to do and how to behave in a way that will help us maximize our own self-interest. I don't mean that in a negative sort of way, but that's just sort of a how we're built sort of way. Now, along with that, however, we have also learned as a species that we have to develop a social brain. So we have been programmed and designed and created to want to have behavior that helps us belong with people, that helps us to be able to establish relationships with them, to be able to be parts of groups, to be able to exhibit behavior that will help us to be liked by others. These are important as well. In fact, when we look at functional magnetic resonance, fMRIs, that look at the brain and what's going on in the brain, what's interesting is that our brains experience, if you will, pain, physical pain, in the same way as it experiences social pain, and the same way with pleasure, physical pleasure and social pleasure. So our brain really can't tell the difference, or at least it responds that way when it's tested, between social pleasure and pain and physical pleasure and pain. So in interactions, what we have to guard against and make sure we understand is that our brain is processing what's happening as social creatures. So if it threatens our autonomy or our status or our sense of trust and fairness, our brain knows it and responds accordingly. So that's our self versus our social brain. Also, what our brain is always on the lookout to do, and that is to differentiate friends from foes. When we first meet someone, our brain immediately categorizes them as either a friend or a foe. Once that happens, our brain begins to process information that comes in about that person and developing its own little mini profile about that person from the very beginning. It impacts our interactions because our brain filters information according to that category. So if we've categorized someone as a friend, we'll look at information that comes in about them in our interactions and put it in that category or look at it through that filter. Likewise, if we've categorized them as a foe, we will perceive data differently. Makes a difference in terms of our interactions. So being aware of how we are currently classifying someone as we go into our interactions is really important. Finally, our brains are huge, enormous, very sophisticated prediction machines. Our brains love to predict and love to problem solve. That's what we do. Our brains predict and problem solve to be able to minimize threats and maximize opportunities. So to do this, our brains just love certainty. Our brain craves it. Our brains love certainty. Also, our brains, in addition to being prediction machines all the time, our brains are constantly interpreting and assigning meaning and trying to figure out what all this means. One of the ways that we do this, that I know you will relate to, is through stories. We do this through stories, creating stories. Stories that explain what's going on, stories that put things into context for us. And as we'll learn later on as we start talking about stories, our stories can change from moment to moment in an interaction. But our brains love to do it and love to do it all the time. We are wired for programming, or for telling stories. So this is what is happening in your brain when we're talking about interactions. Very helpful to know. So now let's talk about not just what happens in our brain, but let's talk now about the foundational concepts that are associated with interact with impact. So remember, we just talked about in the previous video that Interact with Impact prepares you to confidently engage in conversations about work that produce purposeful progress. The foundational concepts in this domain are contained within a super secret formula. That formula is going to be revealed to you by me in these training videos. But let's talk about what each of the elements are in this secret formula. Are you ready? Okay. The formula includes an emphasis on understanding status and incorporating it in our interactions. Story, we just talked about story. The concept related to stories is so integral to how we interact with others with impact. Status plus story plus structure. We want to be able to have a way or a design that we can practice so we can get better, so we can grow in our effectiveness to engage in interactions that have an impact. So that's the secret formula, the super secret formula. Status plus structure plus story equals interact with impact. Okay, let's talk about the first of these areas, the first part of the formula. And this is status. When we talk about status, what we're talking about is the state or condition of something, someone, or the comparative position. So we're talking about the status of this compared to this, or we're talking about the status of this in relationship to this. It's a comparison, or like I said, the state or condition of something. So when we talk about status as it relates to interactions, we usually can describe what that means by looking at these four areas. And then I'll share with you what the specific practice is for status. Now, the first part of status has to do with stance. Remember, I was mentioning earlier that interactions are like this big chemistry mixing of what I bring into the interaction and what the others bring into the interaction. Depending on what that mix is, that will make a big difference in terms of influencing what the outcome is of the interaction. So, for example, if I bring into the conversation a controlling mindset from a perspective that says, my agenda and this is how it needs to be, then chances are the meeting or the interaction is going to go a certain way that might be different than if I brought into the mix some ideas about what we want to accomplish and how to go about doing that, and let the other person or persons come in and to weigh in on the matter at hand. Very different interactions as a result. But the stance says that what I bring into the interaction is going to make a huge difference in terms of the effectiveness of that interaction, along with what others bring. Stance can be tied to our concept of locus of focus. Remember that? That's one of our key concepts that relate to the manager-self domain. Locus of focus says that I am the source and contributing cause of every matter that happens in my life. So the way I experience life and interpret it and see it depends on the lens that I'm looking through. So the locus of focus that we bring into our interactions are always going to drive what we get out of it. Always, never will fail. So locus of focus, our locus of focus, and what others bring into the mix through our stance are influential and make a difference in terms of our interactions with impact. So, key here is bringing into the mix those items that will bring up and build up and contribute to and strengthen the conversation are the ones to bring in. Pack them in your bags. Bring them to the interactions. The other ones, you leave behind. We'll talk more about this in our coaching call. Okay, the second area is the situation. The situation. We will be more effective in our interactions when we are connected to and aware of the specifics of each situation. And when I talk about situation, what I mean is that developing an awareness of the specifics of each situation is helpful as we are navigating through the interaction. So, for example, is the situation one that is very difficult, that's very complex, or is it a pretty straightforward situation in an interaction that we're dealing with? Are we interacting with the person on a topic that's completely new? We've never broached it before. It's an area that is new territory for us. That will influence how we go about the interaction as well. Is the topic one that is one that each of us have had a chance to talk about before? Not just is the topic new, but have we talked about in that particular way? Is it new to us in that regard? So these are the kinds of things that go into determining what is the situation. Is it big or small, difficult or easy, new or routine? We've done it plenty of times before. I've worked with you plenty of times before, and I've worked with you on this topic. Those make a difference in terms of our working through and navigating through our interactions. The third area that influence the status of interact with impact, this is one that we'll talk a lot about in our upcoming coaching call. This says, what is the state of the relationship? So is the relationship with the persons or the group, is that relationship, is it one that is built on trust and one where we are comfortable working with each other, where we have a history of interacting on issues, big, small, complex, difficult, where we're able to work through issues that come up and move forward? Or do we struggle with this person and do they struggle with us? What is the state of the relationship? Because whatever the state of that is will determine what where the interaction begins. Now, when we talk about the state of relationship in our coaching call, one of the things that I'll be talking with you about is looking at the relationship and focusing on what we can do, what I can do, what you can do to contribute, to continue to contribute to building that relationship up. And that's looking at areas where we can help to provide input, guidance, support. It also is about looking at our part, and if we have some issues within the relationship that we're causing, that we look at them directly head on, we call it what it is, and we commit to ourselves that we are going to get better. So this state of the relationship is about not only looking at what is the current weather conditions in our relationship, but what's my part in helping to contribute to making those weather conditions sunnier. The last part of Interact with Impact has to do with what I call the status position. When we talk about Interact with Impact and status, it has to do with comparative position. We also talked a few minutes ago about how our brain is constantly looking at what's going on, and it's constantly predicting and evaluating. And one of the things that it's looking at is status. And what I mean by that is status in relationships, not that one person or one position is more important than another. That's not what I mean. But we do look at the status and positions that others are in, and our brain really does factor that in our interactions. So, for example, if you are a manager or a leader or in your as a business professional, if there is someone who you are managing or leading, there's a whole different dynamic to the interaction than there is for people who are on peers. Now again, I'm not trying to suggest that this position's better or more important or anything like that. What I'm just saying is our brain processes the dynamic of what position I'm in compared to others, and it plays a part in our interactions. So these are the areas: stance, situation, the state of our relationship, and the status of the position. These are the drivers that influence the status part of Interact with Impact. So, I know you're wondering, what is the practice that goes along with this status part of the secret formula? Here it is. It is to acknowledge and address status issues. Okay, I almost ran out of page there. Okay. So what this says is we are going to practice ways to acknowledge these issues. We're going to learn how to develop our awareness of them as issues that make a difference. We are also going to take action. We're going to address the issues. If there are problems, we're going to commit to fixing them. If we are in situations that are tough and difficult, we're going to acknowledge that, and we're going to take actions to address how we need to be in those interactions. So it is about acknowledging, and it's about addressing status issues. Can't wait to share what I have on the coaching call with you about the practices or how we're going to learn how to practice this practice. Okay. So that's number one of the formula for Interact with Impact, status. In the next and final video, we will be talking about the remaining two parts of the formula and the practices that go along with them. So be on the lookout for the next video, and I encourage you to watch it, and I will see you then to talk about the other two elements of the Interact with Impact formula. See you then.